Hi, everyone. Ed Bixby here from the Global Green Burial Alliance, and this is Spotlight Now. Today, I'm here with Amanda Kelly, who is a lifelong learner of science and nature. Amanda began her career as a librarian and holds a master's in information science and undergrad in technology and culture from Western University. After an accident in 2019 landed her in the hospital, she began a spiritual journey that led to an enduring ordainment as a metaphysical minister. She has studied many faiths, customs, and traditions, and recently received her license as a funeral planner from the Bereavement Authority of Ontario. And she is also the co-founder of Awake with Lauren Andrews. So, welcome.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. And, to get started here, why don't we learn a little bit more about your background and what inspired the creation of Awake?
Sure. Yeah. So I actually grew up one of these people who had a total phobia of death and any discussions about end of life, which was interesting because my mom was a wills and estates lawyer. And throughout my career, as you mentioned, I always was a learner. I always was asking lots of questions, always taking lots of courses on things. And I came to a point in my life, like many of us do, where many unfortunate circumstances happened back to back. So I lost five loved ones in very quick succession in 2 years. And it made me look at this end of life space and the way that we do things and the choices and the options that we have very in depth in a way that I never had before. And I had a very different lens on it. And that ultimately led me to starting Awake. What a lot of us don't realize when we go through everyday life is that while we hear about great green trends and eco-friendly options in a lot of headlines in the news here in North America, anyways, people have been learning a lot about composting, which we don't have in Canada, but is gaining traction in the States. We've been hearing a lot about natural burial options. We definitely have this resurgence of natural burial grounds becoming more and more available to different communities across the country. That being said, in Canada, almost 77% of us choose cremation. So in North America, 2.6 million folks every year are choosing cremation. That being said, we also are looking for, many of us, greener options. People who choose end of life decisions make that choice based on very different factors, and everyone's family and everyone's life are different. We have different traditions, we have different financial constraints or options, and we have different dreams and wishes for what we'd like for our loved ones. And after going through five cremations of very close loved ones in my life, I realized there was this huge gap between the green options that were available and the choices that many people that I knew were making at end of life. And I saw a real need to bridge those two things.
Well, that's beautiful, and that's a great story and a great way to want to give back, especially through your personal experience. So, tell us a little bit about the planting kit and ashes to earth cremation soil blend. How does this product work, to neutralize the ashes and allow for help planting?
Yeah, so when I suddenly became the owner of multiple sets of cremated remains, the only thing that I wanted that would give me some peace and some spiritual closure was knowing that I'd be able to give back to the earth and knowing that my loved ones' resting place had a final net positive footprint in the world. Being a librarian and a researcher as I was, I looked into all kinds of options for this. And what I realized was that cremated remains are actually very toxic to ecosystems in particular. They're safe to touch, they're perfectly sanitary, but the biochemistry of them makes them completely incompatible with actually growing new life. And while we are definitely able to scatter cremated remains in many places legally for me, it was very important to know that where they were laid to rest, where I would one day be with them, that was also important, would be contributing to the earth in a positive way. So that led us to speak with a number of soil scientists and a couple teams in other countries around the world that were doing this really, really well. And we're at the forefront, one in the States, one in the UK, and we now have a partner organization in Australia as well. And this led us ultimately to the creation of our memorial planting kits. So we have planting kits that are available for families as an alternative or as an add-on to a traditional urn and or a traditional cremation interment. And essentially, this lets families come home instead of with an urn or a box of cremated remains with a soil blend that is specifically patented to target the biochemistry of cremated remains so that when they're planted in the earth, planted in a potted plant, or scattered in nature, they actually will compost and the nutrients in them will become bioavailable to the root systems of plants. And within 3 to 5 years, they truly will have returned to earth. So we now work with funeral homes across Canada. And then, like I said, we have partners in other countries who do the same to make planting kits available to families who are looking for eco-friendly memorialization or eco-friendly resting places for their loved ones.
It sounds like a wonderful product. I'm very, I'm familiar with probably a few of the organizations you had mentioned, in the United States and in the UK, and I think it's really great because a lot of people don't understand, that cremated remains are very acidic, so they're not really very good for plant life itself. So it's really something that really changes the whole face of what we do, and the idea of scattering and doing it in a responsible way. So I do understand that you have a number of cremains infinity gardens that select cemeteries. Can you tell us about these sites and how that project came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking about that. So, we were having inquiries from families about custom memorials at home. Like I mentioned, backyard gardens, lots of folks who have grandma's roses or dad's lilac tree, etc. But when we really stop to think critically about the impact on the world of our resting places and personally as a legacy, being able to have a final, very positive impact, we realized that where are the majority of resting places and they're at cemeteries. So we started putting together a plan for how we could help cemeteries also to neutralize the environmental effects of cremated remains. And as you mentioned, we now have what we call infinity garden projects. And these are projects that we excavate relatively deep into the ground. We fill an entire garden bed with our soil product. And what that allows is for every single scattering or every spreading of cremated remains that happens in that garden to automatically be treated and automatically be composted over 3 to 5 years, depending on the climate zone, to contribute to that earth. For cemeteries, what this means is that they can plant really beautiful gardens that stay healthy. There's some really interesting case studies from cemeteries in the UK who had rosebush memorials where they were planting cremated remains and were having to replace the roses every single year because they kept dying due to the biochemistry of the cremated remains. So what the infinity gardens allow is for these plantings to remain very healthy and vibrant, to be a therapeutically beautiful space for families to visit, to have some emotional attachment to that space. But on another level, it lets cemeteries who are looking for either an eco-friendly option or frankly are very tight on space to be able to utilize a very small amount of space indefinitely. The beauty of the infinity gardens is as the cremated remains compost, there is nothing left behind except for beautiful, healthy earth, which is an ethos many of us live by, right? Nothing but footprints when we go on our hikes and camping trips. And that lets cemeteries actually, over time, be able to revitalize and reutilize that same space for community gardens.
Well, I think it's really a forward-thinking project. I'm not aware of anyone doing anything quite like what you're doing with those, with the collaboration. So I commend you for that. And it sounds to me like you're probably going to find yourself in a position where many other cemeteries would like to create spaces like this. So kudos to you and your vision. And I noticed on your website that you're working on a living cemetery of your own. So can you tell us a little bit about this project and the progress or the vision of the space that you'd like to create?
Yeah, so there's two important pieces I'll talk about here. We are One of our long-term visions is to operate a couple of spaces in various parts of the country that are living memorial grounds. And there are a few reasons that we'd like to do that. And one of them is simply to demonstrate the beautiful and therapeutic things that are possible. We live in a space where change is hard for everyone, and we have a lot of things already happening around us. And cemeteries have a lot of responsibilities already for maintaining the services that they offer. So being able to take that step and try something completely new is scary, and it's a change. So we'd like to be able to operate a few spaces where we show things that are possible, including hiking trails, including nature play spaces for families, in gardens for families who have lost children, in gardens that are adjacent to off-leash dog parks where we can be laid to rest with our pets' remains, because that's an important part of who we are. Um, and the other reason that this is important to us is because we have quite an epidemic of cemetery closures happening in Canada and in other places around the world, where their models historically have relied on volunteer bases in order to run. And when that's no longer possible, they often, in Canada, will be turned over for operations to the government. In the States, that's not a standard practice. They are often simply abandoned. What we would like to do is we would like to be able to demonstrate how even cemeteries that have a very limited amount of space, that have very limited resources when it comes to staff time and maintenance abilities, can still operate sustainably and efficiently with small gardens like this space. So we're trying to help the industry to grow in new ways that just some of our standards have kind of constricted us in before.
Well, that resonates with myself because that's a lot of the work that we do. With the company that I own, repurposing and recreating spaces, and I think it's a wonderful idea, and I think you'll be really successful with it because the idea of I love the idea that it's a living cemetery. Because we all forget that cemeteries truly are meant for the living. So to create these beautiful garden spaces, I think you're very, very forward thinking, and I applaud you for that. And I think that people should really pay attention to this because, as a business model, to help, it's not so much to make a property profitable as to make it sustainable. If you can create a sustainable space, I think that's what's key. And, I understand that a high percentage of Canadians opt for cremation. Have you seen an increased interest in families or funeral homes or cemeteries, for that matter, in making the disposition of such environmentally friendly options like this happen?
Absolutely. Yeah. So our cremation rate is nearing 80% in Canada, so it is higher than in the States. But at the same time, we have a very strong eco awareness that's building in our society. And there is a need to be able to choose things that are traditional for us. Many, many families have had multiple generations who have chosen cremation now, but while also meet our current values and priorities in the way that we live our life. So we're certainly hearing from many cemeteries and many funeral homes who work specifically with families that this is an option. This is something that is important for them to have.
Absolutely. And what do you think draws your families and partners to what you're offering? Have you like had any discussions with people and they let you know what their thoughts were or how they were thinking?
Yeah, so specifically families we're asking about?
Yes, yeah, for families, yes, correct.
Yeah. So the biggest value that we hear from families is the ability for complete customization and creating memorials that are totally unique. And it poses an interesting challenge to us, honestly, because when we are working with funeral homes, as an example, and they have their selection rooms set up with different urns and different jewelry, and one of the reasons families choose cremation is because they can pick multiple memorialization options. So rather than our planting kits being simply another option on a shelf, it's an interesting challenge because we actually open the door to many choices rather than simply being the item that's sitting on the shelf. And by that, I mean, we have stories from our funeral home partners about a family who's come in and they've asked for their planting kit to be split 18 ways so that every single grandchild and every child can have their own unique memorial. For some of them, it's on a hiking trail. For some of them, it's at the cottage. For some of them, it's in a potted plant that they keep in their apartment downtown. So the ability to have that personal connection with what they are creating for their loved one and that interaction with it on a regular basis, whether you're visiting it annually on a family camping trip or whether you're tending to it every week in the backyard, that personal connection is something we hear a lot about.
That's great. No, that means you're doing good work. When your families, can I always say that if your families can say that the experience, if they can talk of the experience and what it meant to them, but not really talk about the process, meaning like the provider, let's say, for instance, they could say you did a wonderful job, but never cost or anything like that, then you're doing a good job, because that it really resonated with them. So, I mean, this brings me to, my favorite part of our discussion, and that's, wanting to know where you see, Awake and yourself and your partner, in the next 5 to 10 years. Where would you like to see this journey take you?
In the next 5 to 10 years, we would like to be a go-to option for Canadians. We would like Canadians to know that choosing green and choosing to follow family traditions, whatever those may be, is automatically an option that you have available. Um, we'd also like to be working a lot more closely with our colleagues in other countries and seeing this option brought to families and to folks who live all over the world. Something that's important to Lauren and I, you mentioned we have a few different pillars of what we're doing at Awake, and something that is personally very important to us is when we are able to have some of those resting places of our own set up as demonstration sites or inspiration sites, if you will, that we have our own charitable organization and we're able to offer no cost burials or no cost resting places for families who've lost children or for families who are representing vulnerable populations. And that will be different in different communities for where we set up. But on a personal note, it's something that motivates us and keeps us going. We believe everyone should have the right to a green choice, regardless of your circumstances. And we're working towards that every day.
Well, that's a beautiful vision, and I know it'll come true. I think you guys are doing great work up there, so keep it up. And Thanks for visiting us today, Amanda. Viewers can learn more by visiting awakeashes.com, and do support Amanda and Awake. It's important work that they're doing. And this is Ed Bixby from the Global Green Burial Alliance. Spotlight now. So see you at the next spotlight. And thank you again, Amanda.
Thanks, Ed. Take care.